In the Pacific War, danger rarely announced itself with noise or movement. More often, it arrived quietly without warning, in the form of a single rifle shot that froze entire units in place. By 1943, American forces fighting across jungle-covered islands had learned that Japanese snipers were not merely skilled marksmen, but deliberate disruptors of momentum. A single sniper could halt an advance for hours, sometimes days, forcing infantry to dig in, reroute, or wait for artillery support that often did more damage to the terrain than to the hidden enemy. Japanese snipers were effective precisely because they did not behave like conventional infantry. They avoided rapid engagement and rarely fired more than once from the same position unless absolutely necessary. Many constructed hides days or weeks in advance, hollowing out tree trunks, burrowing into root systems, or concealing themselves in shell craters that blended perfectly into the surrounding terrain. They targeted individuals whose loss would cause the greatest disruption: officers, radiomen, medics, understanding that the psychological effect of a well-placed shot often outweighed the tactical value of the casualty itself. The U.S. Marine Corps entered the Pacific War unprepared for this type of threat. There was no standardized sniper doctrine, no officially issued sniper rifle, and no formal training pipeline dedicated to counter sniper operations. Most Marines carried the M1 Garand, a reliable semi-automatic rifle well-suited for general infantry combat, but ill-matched for the patient, precision-based duel that jungle sniping demanded. When snipers began slowing advances and increasing casualties, Marines were forced to improvise solutions on the spot. One of those solutions came in the form of a rifle that, by military standards, was unimpressive. It was a civilian bolt-action rifle, purchased privately before the war, the type of firearm commonly used for hunting deer or varmints back home. It was inexpensive compared to military weapons, lacked any official designation, and had never been intended for battlefield use. Some officers viewed it as a curiosity, others as a liability. Compared to issued weapons, it looked outdated and underpowered, and more than one Marine dismissed it as something better suited to a sporting catalogue than a combat zone. The Marine who carried it was not selected through any formal process. He had no sniper badge, no special insignia, and no official role beyond that of an infantryman. What set him apart was experience rather than rank. Before the war, he had spent years hunting, learning to read terrain, wind, and movement in environments where patience mattered more than speed. He understood how long a person could remain motionless, how foliage moved when disturbed by something unnatural, and how animals reacted to unseen human presence. These skills, learned far from any battlefield, would soon become invaluable. When Japanese sniper activity began to stall his unit's advance, the Marine did not volunteer with bravado or urgency. He simply made his case calmly, explaining that he could locate firing positions and eliminate them if given time and freedom of movement. The rifle he proposed using raised eyebrows. It was light, lacked military approval, and carried a simple commercial scope mounted without the ruggedization normally demanded by combat conditions. In the humid Pacific environment, such equipment was assumed to fail quickly. But there were no better alternatives available. Permission was granted out of necessity rather than confidence. The Marine was paired loosely with spotters and allowed to operate forward of the main line, moving deliberately and independently. There were no expectations of immediate results. At best, officers hoped he might suppress a sniper or force relocation. No one anticipated what would follow over the next 5 days. The rifle itself demanded discipline. Its bolt-action design eliminated any temptation toward rapid fire. Each shot required deliberate chambering, forcing the shooter to commit mentally before pulling the trigger. The scope, though fragile, provided enough magnification to identify subtle irregularities in the jungle canopy, unnatural straight lines, shadows that did not belong, or foliage that failed to move with the wind. These details were invisible to the untrained eye, but obvious to someone accustomed to hunting living targets. On the first day, the Marine did not fire immediately. He observed, He listened. He mapped the rhythm of enemy fire and noted where silence followed shots instead of movement. Japanese snipers often remained hidden even after firing, confident in their concealment. That confidence became their weakness. When the Marine finally took his first shot, it was not hurried. It was the product of hours of observation, and when it landed, the firing position fell silent permanently. By the end of that first day, the advance resumed. No one made announcements, no tallies were kept, but it was clear that something had changed. The rifle that had been dismissed as cheap had done what heavier weapons could not. It had restored momentum. And this was only the beginning. The second day began without ceremony, but the change in the jungle was immediate. The silence that followed the first sniper's removal did not last long. Japanese units were methodical, and they did not abandon effective tactics simply because one position went quiet. By mid-morning, a new shot rang out from a different direction, this time farther back from the original line of advance. The spacing suggested coordination. Japanese snipers were covering each other now, adjusting their fields of fire to compensate for a threat they had not yet identified. The Marine recognized the shift immediately. Japanese snipers rarely operated alone once they sensed danger. Pairs or small groups would stagger positions, forcing any counter-sniper to expose himself by chasing sound rather than intention. The mistake many inexperienced counter-snipers made was reacting too quickly, firing at muzzle flash or noise. That approach almost always ended with a bullet coming back from a second, unseen position. Instead, the Marine waited again. He observed how long the sniper waited between shots, how the surrounding foliage behaved, and how the American unit reacted. Japanese snipers relied on predictability. They expected infantry to move cautiously after a hit, to cluster around wounded men, to expose themselves while searching for the shooter. This Marine did none of that. He stayed still, letting the jungle reveal the sniper's impatience. When the shot came, it came from higher elevation than expected. The Marine adjusted his position slowly, crawling rather than walking, using shallow depressions in the ground to mask movement. Hours passed before he was confident enough to fire. The shot was deliberate and singular. Once again, the firing position went silent. The advance resumed within minutes. By the end of the second day, 3 sniper positions had been neutralized. None of them involved extended exchanges. None involved return fire from the Japanese side. That detail mattered. Japanese snipers were trained to relocate or counter, fire if engaged by inferior marksmen. The absence of response indicated that they were being eliminated before they could react. Word of this spread quickly along the line. Other units previously stalled by sniper fire began requesting assistance. The Marine did not move immediately. He understood that overuse would reveal patterns. Japanese snipers were observant, and repetition bred adaptation. Instead, he focused on the immediate area, where Japanese commanders would least expect continued pressure. On the third day, the Japanese attempted deception. A single shot rang out from a deliberately exposed position, followed by movement intended to draw attention. The Marine recognized the tactic. It was meant to lure him into revealing himself. Rather than respond, he tracked the area around the decoy. Japanese snipers often trusted their concealment too much, assuming their enemy would focus on the obvious threat. That assumption failed. The Marine identified a secondary position set back and slightly offset from the decoy. When he fired, the decoy position went silent without firing again. The trap had failed. By dusk, 2 more sniper threats were removed. The count reached 7, though no one formally tracked it. The 4th day was the most dangerous. Japanese snipers adjusted their tactics further, firing less frequently and changing positions between shots. This forced longer observation periods and increased risk. The Marine spent nearly an entire day watching a single patch of jungle, convinced that a sniper was present, but unwilling to confirm it. Only when a barely perceptible shift in shadow betrayed human movement did he fire. The shot ended the threat. Shortly after, another sniper attempted to respond, firing from a different angle. The Marine relocated immediately, anticipating retaliation. He waited for hours, resisting the urge to pursue. Eventually, the sniper revealed himself through repetition, firing again from what he believed was a secure position. The Marine fired once. Silence followed. By the end of the fourth day, the area that had once been dominated by Japanese sniper fire was effectively neutralized. American units advanced with renewed confidence, though cautiously. The jungle did not forgive carelessness, but the sense of unseen danger had diminished. The fifth day brought the final engagements. Japanese snipers were now fully aware that a skilled counter-sniper was operating in the area. Their concealment improved, their firing intervals lengthened, and their patience increased. This made detection harder, but it also limited their effectiveness. A sniper who does not fire cannot control terrain. The Marine used this against them. He anticipated where a sniper would need to fire to disrupt movement and focused his attention there. Late in the day, a single shot rang out from a position that did not align with the sound's direction. It was deliberate misdirection. The Marine adjusted his scan wider than usual and noticed a subtle disturbance in vegetation that did not match wind patterns. He fired once. That was the 15th position neutralized in 5 days. No celebration occurred. The Marine returned to his unit quietly, his rifle coated in mud and moisture, the scope fogged but intact. The jungle remained dangerous, but its most effective psychological weapon in that sector had been removed. Only then did officers begin to take the rifle and the method seriously. By the 6th morning, it was clear to Japanese commanders that something had gone wrong. Sniper fire, which had previously dictated the tempo of American movement in the area, had ceased almost entirely. Patrols that should have been stalled were advancing. Units that had been pinned down for days were moving again with caution, but without hesitation. Japanese officers did not need detailed reports to understand what that meant. Their snipers were not merely relocating, they were being removed. Japanese doctrine emphasized learning through observation, and the absence of returning snipers was itself information. It suggested not indiscriminate fire, but precision. Someone was waiting, someone was watching, and that knowledge forced a change in behavior. Snipers who remained became more cautious, firing less frequently and choosing positions that favored escape over control. In doing so, they reduced their own effectiveness, trading influence for survival. This shift made the Marines' work both harder and more dangerous. A sniper who fires often reveals himself. A sniper who fires rarely blends back into the jungle. The Marine now faced longer observation periods, greater uncertainty, and the increased risk of being counter-hunted. Japanese snipers were not passive targets. Many were experienced soldiers who understood concealment as well as he did. If they suspected a counter-sniper, they would attempt to locate him using patience rather than aggression. The Marine adapted by becoming even more deliberate. He limited his movement, avoided predictable observation points, and changed positions more frequently even when no shots were fired. He understood that remaining unseen mattered as much as eliminating the threat. The rifle, still dismissed by some as inadequate for combat, proved well suited to this phase of the fight. Its lightweight allowed quiet repositioning. Its accuracy rewarded restraint. It demanded nothing from the shooter except discipline. Japanese snipers began testing the area cautiously. Single shots were fired from extreme range, often at targets of opportunity rather than high-value personnel. These shots were less about disruption and more about detection. The Marine recognized them for what they were. He did not respond immediately. Each time he withheld fire, the sniper's confidence grew. Eventually, confidence produced repetition, and repetition produced vulnerability. The psychological strain increased on both sides. For Japanese snipers, the jungle no longer felt secure. For the Marine, every moment of stillness carried the possibility that he was being watched as closely as he watched others. The jungle amplified this tension. Sounds were unreliable. Shadows shifted constantly. Heat and humidity eroded focus. Fatigue accumulated quietly, dulling senses and slowing reactions. Despite this, the Marine continued to operate with patience. He did not chase every suspected position. He selected only those that threatened movement or morale. This selectivity mattered. It reduced exposure and preserved unpredictability. Japanese snipers could no longer anticipate when or where he would appear, only that if they fired too often, they risked silence of their own. By this point, the 5-day stretch had already begun to influence local command decisions. Officers who had once dismissed the value of counter-sniping now prioritized it. Infantry advances were planned with precision overwatch in mind. Units paused not just to avoid sniper fire, but to allow time for observation. The presence of a capable counter-sniper changed behavior up and down the line. The Marine did not receive formal recognition during this period. There were no immediate commendations or written reports detailing his actions. What mattered was effect. Advances resumed, casualties dropped, morale stabilized. The rifle that had been viewed as a liability became a quiet asset, passed without comment but no longer questioned. Japanese snipers did not disappear entirely, but their influence diminished. They became cautious to the point of irrelevance in that sector. The jungle remained dangerous but no longer paralyzing. Control shifted subtly, not through overwhelming force, but through the removal of uncertainty. This was the turning point. Not because the Marine had eliminated every sniper, but because he had altered the psychological balance. Japanese snipers now feared exposure as much as Americans had feared concealment. That balance would not easily reverse. When the fighting in that sector moved on, there was no formal conclusion to the 5 days that had reshaped it. No after-action report summarized the removal of 15 sniper positions in 5 days. No official tally recorded what had happened in precise terms. The Pacific War did not pause to document moments like this. Units advanced, terrain changed hands, and attention shifted to the next objective. Yet the effects of those days lingered long after the rifle fell silent. For the Marines who had been stalled by sniper fire, the change was immediate and tangible. Movement resumed without the constant expectation of a single unseen shot halting progress. Patrols advanced with caution but without paralysis. Officers noticed that decision-making became faster once the threat of unpredictable sniper fire diminished. The jungle was still dangerous, but it was no longer psychologically dominant. That shift mattered more than numbers ever could. The Marine who had carried the rifle was not reassigned to a specialized role. He was not pulled from the line or turned into a permanent counter-sniper. The Marine Corps at that stage of the war did not yet have the structure to formalize what he had done. Instead, his experience circulated informally. Officers spoke quietly to one another. Non-commissioned officers passed on lessons without naming sources. The idea that patience, observation, and precision could neutralize a threat that brute force could not began to take hold. The rifle itself did not change. It remained what it had always been, a commercially produced bolt-action firearm never designed for jungle warfare. It warped slightly in the humidity, required constant care, and lacked the ruggedness of military-issue weapons. Yet its performance forced a reconsideration of assumptions. It demonstrated that accuracy and discipline mattered more than rate of fire in certain environments, and that a well-placed single shot could have greater tactical impact than dozens fired indiscriminately. Japanese sniper doctrine did not collapse because of this one episode, but it was weakened. Snipers remained effective throughout the Pacific War, but their ability to dominate entire sectors diminished as American units adapted. Counter-sniping became more deliberate. Observation became more systematic. Units learned that the jungle did not belong exclusively to those who hid best, but to those who waited longest. The fear that had once favored Japanese snipers began to work against them. By late 1945, the Marine Corps began moving toward formal sniper training programs, drawing on accumulated experience from the field. These programs emphasized skills that had proven effective in places like this: patience, concealment, terrain reading, and restraint. The lessons were not framed around heroic feats or kill counts, but around influence. A sniper's value was measured not by how many shots he fired, but by how much freedom of movement he denied the enemy. The story of the cheap rifle never became legend in the way some wartime stories did. It lacked spectacle. There were no dramatic firefights, no desperate last stands, no overwhelming odds overcome in a single moment. What it offered instead was something quieter and more enduring. It showed how a single individual, using an unremarkable tool with exceptional discipline, could change the character of a fight without drawing attention to himself. After the war, many of the Marines who had fought in the Pacific returned home and rarely spoke about what they had done. The Marine who carried that rifle was no exception. His experience was absorbed into the larger institutional memory of the Corps, contributing to changes that would shape future conflicts. Precision warfare became less about equipment and more about mindset. The rifle was only a means. The real weapon was patience. In the end, the rifle was not remembered because it was cheap. It was remembered because it worked, not loudly, not dramatically, but decisively. 15 sniper positions neutralized in 5 days did not change the course of the war, but it changed how one stretch of jungle was fought, and that was enough. In war, control is often decided not by who fires the most shots, but by who removes uncertainty first. That rifle did exactly that. Thank you for watching.